The cafeteria erupted into chaos in the span of a single heartbeat. One moment, the usual symphony of teenage noise, laughter cascading like waterfalls, trays clattering against tables, the bass-heavy pulse of someone's phone speaker bleeding into the air. The next moment, silence. The kind of silence that arrives when something terrible has just happened, when 100 pairs of eyes have witnessed the unthinkable. Maya Chen lay sprawled across the lunch table, her physics textbook scattered, her sandwich crushed beneath her shoulder blade. The laminate surface was cold against her cheek, sticky with residual soda from whoever had eaten there during first lunch. Her vision swam, stars dancing at the periphery. The pain came in waves, sharp at her ribs where she'd hit the table's edge, dull and throbbing across her shoulders where hands had gripped her. Above her stood Jackson Pierce, his hands still extended from the shove, his face a mask of shock giving way to something harder. He was beautiful in that dangerous, untouchable way that certain boys are at 17, all sharp jawlines and effortless confidence, the kind of magnetic presence that made people orbit around him whether they wanted to or not. His Letterman jacket, pristine white leather with royal blue sleeves, seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights. The embroidered name on the chest read, Captain. For 3 seconds that stretched into eternity, nobody moved. Then the whispers started, a hissing tide of judgment and excitement. "Oh my God, did you see that?" Jackson just completely lost it. She was sitting in his spot though. That doesn't mean he can just. Dude, you don't mess with tradition. Maya's fingers found purchase on the table edge. She pushed herself up slowly, her arms trembling. A thin line of blood traced down from her hairline where she'd caught the corner of someone's abandoned tray. She could taste copper and humiliation in equal measure. Jackson was already backing away, his crew closing ranks around him, Tyler, Marcus, and Devin, the defensive line both on the field and in life. Their faces showed varying degrees of concern and amusement. Tyler was actually grinning, his phone out, probably already uploading to his story. "Should have paid attention to the seating chart, new girl," Jackson said, his voice carrying across the silent cafeteria. He was performing now, playing to the crowd, trying to transform his moment of explosive anger into something controlled, something intentional. "That's been my table since freshman year." Maya stood fully, her legs surprisingly steady beneath her. She met his eyes, those impossibly green eyes that had made half the senior class fall in love with him, eyes that now held a flicker of something that might have been regret, buried deep beneath layers of defensive arrogance. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She simply gathered her belongings with deliberate care, placing each item back in her bag with ritualistic precision. Her textbook. Her crushed sandwich, now wrapped in its torn paper bag. Her phone, miraculously uncracked. The entire cafeteria watched this silent ceremony. Then she looked at Jackson one more time. "You're right," she said quietly, her voice somehow cutting through the watching silence. "I didn't know the rules. But now I do." She walked out of the cafeteria, head high, leaving a wake of stunned faces and the first tremors of what would become an earthquake. If you're watching this and thinking about what you would do in Maya's position, take a moment to subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be heard, to be shared, and to remind us all that the most powerful revolutions often begin in the quietest moments. The ones where someone decides that the old rules aren't good enough anymore. Before the storm. Maya Chen had arrived at Riverside Academy exactly 1 week before the incident. Her family had moved from Seattle to this small New England town when her mother accepted a position as head of surgery at the regional hospital. The transition had been brutal, leaving behind her art collective, her favorite coffee shop where she spent hours sketching, her best friend Olivia who'd known her since they were 6 years old and bonded over their shared obsession with graphic novels. Riverside Academy was the kind of school that appeared in glossy brochures promising excellence in education and character. The kind of school where the football team's success was announced on the electronic sign outside, where homecoming was a week-long festival, where legacy students wore their family traditions like armor. Maya's first few days had been a masterclass in invisibility. She'd perfected the art of moving through hallways like a ghost, of sitting in the back corner of classrooms, of eating lunch on a bench outside near the art building where she could sketch the old oak trees that lined the quad. She was good at being unnoticed. She'd learned that survival sometimes meant taking up as little space as possible. But on that Tuesday, a cold rain had driven her inside. The cafeteria had seemed impossibly vast, a coliseum where social hierarchy played out in real time. She'd spotted what looked like an empty table in the back corner, far from the central tables where the royalty held court. It seemed safe. Neutral territory. She'd been eating in peaceful solitude for exactly 11 minutes when Jackson Pierce arrived. Later, she would learn his full story. How his father, Jonathan Pierce, was a former NFL player turned sports commentator who lived 3 hours away and showed up exactly twice a year, Christmas and Jackson's birthday. How his mother, Eleanor Pierce, sat on the school board and the hospital foundation board and pretty much every board that mattered in town. How Jackson had been groomed since childhood to be exceptional, to lead, to win at everything. How the weight of those expectations had forged him into something brilliant and volatile. But in that moment, all she saw was a boy who believed the world owed him deference, and all he saw was a girl who'd broken an unspoken rule. "You're in my spot," he'd said, his voice not loud but carrying an edge of disbelief, as if he couldn't quite process that someone wouldn't automatically know this. Maya had looked up from her sketchpad. "I'm sorry, I didn't see anyone sitting here. It's not about whether someone's sitting here right now. It's my table. Has been for 3 years." His friends had gathered behind him, a wall of Letterman jackets and barely suppressed grins. She'd started to pack up her things. "Okay, I'll move." But Jackson's hand had shot out, knocking her sketchpad to the floor. The pages had fanned open, revealing her drawings, not the light, pretty sketches she showed her teachers, but the dark stuff, the charcoal portraits of fractured faces and empty rooms that she drew when she couldn't sleep. "You should be more careful," he'd said, and there was something in his tone, not quite cruelty, but something performing cruelty, something trying to impress the watching audience. Maya had knelt down to gather her drawings, heat flooding her cheeks. And that's when it happened, a sudden spike of anger that surprised even her. As she stood up, she'd looked him dead in the eye and said, "You dropped something." "What?" "Your humanity. It's on the floor with my sketchbook." The cafeteria had gasped, a collective intake of breath. Someone had laughed, a genuine shocked laugh quickly stifled. Jackson's face had transformed. The casual arrogance evaporated, replaced by something raw and furious. In that moment, he wasn't the golden boy captain of the football team. He was just a 17-year-old boy whose authority had been questioned in front of an audience, and he didn't know how to handle it except with force. His hands had gripped her shoulders, and then she was airborne for a horrible half-second before impact. The rest, as they say, was history. The aftermath. The nurse's office smelled like antiseptic and old bandages. Nurse Martinez cleaned the cut on Maya's forehead with gentle efficiency while asking questions in a soft, practiced voice. "Are you dizzy? Nauseous? Having any trouble focusing your vision?" "I'm fine," Maya said for the 3rd time, which they both knew was a lie. Principal Hendricks arrived 20 minutes later, his expression carefully neutral in the way of administrators who've perfected the art of revealing nothing. He was a tall man with graying temples and the perpetually tired eyes of someone who'd been in education too long. "Miss Chen, I'm deeply sorry this happened. We have a zero-tolerance policy for physical altercations at Riverside." "It wasn't an altercation," Maya said quietly. "An altercation would imply I fought back." Hendricks's jaw tightened. "Nevertheless, there will be consequences. Jackson has been suspended for 3 days." 3 days, Maya repeated, the words hollow in her mouth. "And he'll be required to issue a formal apology. His mother is on her way." Hendricks leaned forward slightly. I know this is difficult, Maya, but Jackson is under tremendous pressure. He's being scouted by Division I programs. He carries the hopes of this team, this school. That doesn't excuse what happened, of course, but... But what? Maya interrupted. But I should understand that his future is more valuable than my safety? Hendricks looked genuinely pained. That's not what I'm saying. Then W.H. Are you saying? He was saved from answering by a knock on the door. Eleanor Pierce entered like a force of nature, perfectly tailored suit, diamond earrings, a lawyer's briefcase in one hand and her phone in the other. Behind her came Jackson, his face carefully blank. Principal Hendricks. Miss Chen. Eleanor Pierce's voice was smooth, professional, completely in control. I want to express my deepest regret for my son's behavior. It was completely unacceptable. Jackson was staring at a spot on the floor approximately 3 feet to Maya's left. His jaw muscle twitched. Jackson has something he'd like to say, Eleanor continued, placing a hand on her son's shoulder. Jackson finally looked at Maya. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, genuine shame, maybe, or just exhaustion. I'm sorry for putting my hands on you. It was wrong. It won't happen again. The apology was perfect in its emptiness. Rehearsed. Legally sufficient and emotionally void. Maya found herself studying him with an artist's eye. The tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers kept curling and uncurling at his sides, the tiny muscle movements around his eyes that suggested he wasn't sleeping well. He looked like someone trapped in a role he'd long ago stopped enjoying but couldn't figure out how to escape. Okay, Maya said simply. Eleanor Pierce looked relieved. The school has assured us that Jackson will face appropriate consequences. We're also prepared to cover any medical expenses, of course. It's just a cut, Maya said. I don't need anything from you. Eleanor's smile was gracious and completely failed to reach her eyes. Nevertheless, we want to make this right. Jackson understands he made a serious error in judgment. After they left, Nurse Martinez handed Maya an ice pack. For the record, the nurse said quietly, 3 days is bullshit. Maya almost laughed. Is that your professional medical opinion? That's my opinion as someone who's worked here for 15 years and seen how this place protects its golden boys. Martinez sat down beside her. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, Maya admitted. But I'll think of something. That night, Maya lay in her bed in her half-unpacked room and stared at the ceiling. Her mother had wanted to march into the school and raise hell, but Maya had talked her down. She didn't want to be the girl whose mother fought her battles. She needed to figure this out herself. She pulled out her laptop and started researching. Not about bullying or school violence, that would come later. First, she needed to understand the ecosystem she'd stumbled into. She found Jackson Pierce Eve. Ryware Online. Game highlights where he moved with impossible grace, dodging defenders like they were standing still. Newspaper articles about his recruitment, speculation about which program he'd choose. Interviews where he spoke in practiced sound bites about teamwork and dedication. She found his social media, carefully curated images of a perfect life. Jackson with his arm around his teammates after a big win. Jackson volunteering at the youth football camp, grinning as he helped a tiny kid in oversized pads throw a spiral. Jackson at homecoming last year, his date a beautiful girl named Vanessa who was now apparently at UCLA. But she also found the cracks, if you knew how to look. Photos where his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. A comment from 2 years ago on a post about his father, thanks for showing up to this one. The way he was tagged in hundreds of party photos but never seemed to be genuinely enjoying himself, always slightly apart from the chaos around him. She found an old article from the town newspaper about a freshman hazing incident 3 years ago. Jackson had been mentioned as a witness. The investigation had been inconclusive. The freshman in question had transferred schools. Maya took notes, building a profile. Jackson Pierce wasn't just a bully. He was a product, carefully constructed by parental expectations and social pressure, given power by a system that valued athletic success above almost everything else. He was both perpetrator and victim, which didn't excuse what he'd done but did make the landscape more complex. If she was going to change things, she needed to understand the architecture of power at Riverside Academy. And she needed allies. She opened a new document and titled it, Project Restoration. Then she began to write. Finding the others. The next day, Maya went to school wearing the bandage on her forehead like a badge. She didn't hide it with her hair or try to minimize it. She walked through the hallways with her head up, meeting the stares and whispers with calm acknowledgement. Jackson wasn't there, day one of his 3-day vacation. But his absence was somehow louder than his presence. His friends clustered at his locker between classes, performing loyalty. Girls whispered in bathroom corners, debating whether what happened was really that bad or if Maya had overreacted. In AP Literature, Maya noticed a girl sitting 2 rows over who kept glancing at her. She had dark curly hair pulled back with a colorful scarf and glasses with tortoiseshell frames. When their eyes met, the girl didn't look away. Instead, she gave Maya a small, almost imperceptible nod. After class, the girl was waiting in the hallway. "I'm Zoe," she said without preamble. "I saw what happened yesterday. It was fucked up." "Thanks," Maya said, surprised by the directness. "I wanted to say something, do something, but Zoe trailed off, looking genuinely pained. "There's this thing that happens You see something wrong, and you think about intervening, but then you remember what happened to other people who tried to stand up to the football team." "What happened?" Zoe lowered her voice. "My friend Rachel reported Tyler Martinez, one of Jackson's crew, for cheating on a chemistry final. She had proof. Photos. The administration did a whole investigation, and Tyler got a slap on the wrist. A week later, someone spray-painted 'snitch' across her car. She finished the year but transferred to Maplewood for senior year. And everyone just accepted that. That's how it works here. The football team brings in money, brings in prestige, brings in college scouts who make the school look good. So they get protection. Unofficial, unspoken protection. But real." Zoe adjusted her glasses. "But maybe it doesn't have to be that way." Maya felt a spark of recognition. "You want to change things." "I want to," Zoe admitted. "I'm just not sure how." "I'm working on that," Maya said. "Are you free after school?" They met at the public library, a beautiful old Carnegie building downtown with high ceilings and stained glass. Maya had chosen it specifically because it was off-campus, neutral ground where they wouldn't be overheard. Zoe brought someone with her, a tall, lanky boy with messy brown hair and the kind of thoughtful face that suggested he spent a lot of time in his own head. "This is David Kim. He's in the journalism club. I thought he could help." David offered a shy smile. "I've been wanting to write about the culture here for years, but the faculty advisor always shuts it down. Too controversial." They sat at a study table in the back, and Maya laid out her notebook. "I've been thinking about this like an art project," she began. "You know how in art, you sometimes have to deconstruct something to understand its structure. That's what we need to do with the power dynamics here." She'd drawn a diagram, circles within circles, showing the layers of influence at Riverside Academy. At the center was Jackson Pierce. Around him, his teammates and close friends. Beyond that, the broader athletic department, the boosters, the parents who donated to the sports programs. Then the administration, who relied on those donations and that prestige. And finally, the outer circle, the student body, mostly powerless but not entirely. "This is really good," David said, studying the diagram. "It's like a map of complicity. Exactly. And if we want to change the system, we can't just go after Jackson. He's a symptom, not the D. ISIS. Maya pulled out her phone and opened her notes. I've been researching. The Athletics Booster Club manages a huge amount of money, scholarships, equipment, facility upgrades. It's all technically public record, but nobody ever looks at it. What are you suggesting? Zoe asked. I'm suggesting we look. Not to find corruption necessarily, but to understand where the power comes from. Money. Prestige. Legacy. If we can show the school community that the cost of protecting players like Jackson is too high, then the calculus changes, David finished. Basic economics. Right now, the benefit of protecting the football team outweighs the cost. But if we can flip that. They spent the next 2 hours planning. David would start digging into public records and school board minutes. Zoe would tap her network of similarly frustrated students, building a quiet coalition. Maya would continue her research on Jackson specifically, not to destroy him, but to understand him well enough. Enough to predict his moves. There's something else, Maya said as they were packing up. I don't want this to be about revenge. I'm not trying to ruin Jackson's life. He slammed you into a table, Zoe said bluntly. You'd be justified in wanting revenge. Maybe. But revenge doesn't change anything. It just perpetuates the cycle. Maya traced a finger along the circles of her diagram. I want to change the system so that what happened to me doesn't happen to the next new student. That means we have to be smart, not just angry. David nodded slowly. Restorative justice instead of punitive. Exactly. They agreed to meet twice a week, always off campus, always carefully. They were building something fragile and dangerous, and they all knew it. But for the first time since the cafeteria incident, Maya felt something other than anger or fear. She felt hope. The return. Jackson came back on Friday, his 3-day suspension complete. Maya watched from across the quad as he pulled into the senior parking lot in his Jeep, music pulsing from the speakers. Tyler and Marcus were waiting for him, greeting him with elaborate handshakes and backslaps like he'd returned from war rather than a long weekend. But something was different. Maya could see it in the way he held himself, a tension that hadn't been there before. He kept glancing around, hyper-aware of who was watching, how they were looking at him. During lunch, she deliberately sat at a different table in the cafeteria, not outside, not hiding, but also not provoking. She sat with Zoe and David, the three of them forming the nucleus of something new. Jackson sat at his usual table with his usual crew. But the atmosphere was off. The easy laughter seemed forced. A few tables over, Maya noticed a group of sophomore girls watching Jackson with expressions that weren't quite fear and weren't quite admiration. They were watching him critically, evaluating. The narrative is shifting, David murmured, following her gaze. People are paying attention differently now. That attention intensified in the coming days. David had published an article in the school newspaper, not about the cafeteria incident directly, but about school culture more broadly. The cost of winning, what we sacrifice for success. It was carefully worded, avoiding direct accusations, but the implications were clear. The article quoted anonymous students talking about feeling unsafe, about watching friends get hurt and having nowhere to turn. It included publicly available data on disciplinary actions over the past 5 years, showing a stark disparity in how athletes and non-athletes were treated for similar infractions. Principal Hendricks called David into his office. The conversation was concerned, David reported afterward. Not quite a threat, but a strong suggestion that future articles should be reviewed more carefully. Which means we're hitting a nerve, Zoe said. She'd been conducting her own quiet campaign, talking to students one-on-one, building a network of people who were tired of the status quo but had been too afraid to speak up. Maya continued her observations of Jackson. She watched him in the hallways between classes, studied him during the one class they shared, AP Government, noticed the small tells that revealed his state of mind. The way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was stressed. How his knee bounced under the desk when he was anxious. The forced quality of his smile when people congratulated him on the upcoming game. She was in the library after school when she saw him for the first time without his armor, without his friends, without an audience. He was at a computer in the far corner, headphones on, scrolling through what looked like emails from college coaches. Maya found herself walking over before she'd consciously decided to. She stopped a few feet away, waiting for him to notice her. When he looked up and saw her, his whole body went rigid. "Hi," she said simply. Jackson pulled off his headphones. "What do you want?" "To talk. Just for a minute." He glanced around, checking for witnesses. They were alone in this section. "I said I was sorry." "I know. And I accepted your apology." Maya pulled out the chair across from him but didn't sit down yet. "Can I ask you something?" He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. "Do you truly like football?" Maya asked. Of all the questions she could have posed, this one clearly caught him off guard. "What?" "I've been watching game highlights." "You're incredible, that's not up for debate. But in every single interview I've seen, you talk about the team, about the program, about making your school proud. You never talk about whether you personally enjoy it." Jackson's jaw worked, emotions flickering across his face too quickly to name. "That's none of your business." "You're right, it's not. I'm just curious." Maya sat down now, keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. "Because from where I'm sitting, you look like someone going through the motions. Playing a role you're really good at but maybe don't love anymore." The article quoted anonymous students talking about feeling unsafe, about watching friends get hurt and having nowhere to turn. It included publicly available data on disciplinary actions over the past 5 years, showing a stark disparity in how athletes and non-athletes were treated for similar infractions. Principal Hendricks called David into his office. The conversation was concerned, David reported afterward. Not quite a threat, but a strong suggestion that future articles should be reviewed more carefully. "Which means we're hitting a nerve," Zoe said. She'd been conducting her own quiet campaign, talking to students one-on-one, building a network of people who were tired of the status quo but had been too afraid to speak up. Maya continued her observations of Jackson. She watched him in the hallways between classes, studied him during the one class they shared, AP Government, noticed the small tells that revealed his state of mind. The way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was stressed. How his knee bounced under the desk when he was anxious. The forced quality of his smile when people congratulated him on the upcoming game. She was in the library after school when she saw him for the first time without his armor, without his friends, without an audience. He was at a computer in the far corner, headphones on, scrolling through what looked like emails from college coaches. Maya found herself walking over before she'd consciously decided to. She stopped a few feet away, waiting for him to notice her. When he looked up and saw her, his whole body went rigid. "Hi," she said simply. Jackson pulled off his headphones. "What do you want?" "To talk. Just for a minute." He glanced around, checking for witnesses. They were alone in this section. "I said I was sorry." "I know. And I accepted your apology." Maya pulled out the chair across from him but didn't sit down yet. "Can I ask you something?" He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. "Do you truly like football?" Maya asked. Of all the questions she could have posed, this one clearly caught him off guard. "What?" "I've been watching game highlights." "You're incredible, that's not up for debate. But in every single interview I've seen, you talk about the team, about the program, about making your school proud. You never talk about whether you personally enjoy it." Jackson's jaw worked, emotions flickering across his face too quickly to name. That's none of your business. You're right, it's not. I'm just curious. Maya sat down now, keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. Because from where I'm sitting, you look like someone going through the motions. Playing a role you're really good at but maybe don't love anymore. You don't know anything about me, Jackson said, but there wasn't much heat in it. No, I don't. But I know what it's like to feel trapped by other people's expectations. Maya thought of her own parents, particularly her father back in Seattle, who'd wanted her to pursue computer science instead of art, who still sent her articles about practical careers every few weeks. I'm guessing your dad played college ball? NFL, Jackson said shortly. That's a lot to live up to. I'm not trying to live up to anything. I'm making my own path. Are you? Maya kept her tone genuinely curious, not confrontational. Because from where I'm sitting, you're following exactly the path everyone laid out for you. Be the star quarterback. Get the scholarship. Make everyone proud. Don't mess it up. Jackson stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You think you're so smart, don't you? Coming in here, analyzing everyone like we're subjects in your little art project. That's not what I'm doing. Then what are you doing? What is this? He gestured between them. Some kind of redemption arc for me? You're going to fix the broken bully with your insight and compassion? Maya stood too, meeting his eyes. No. I'm trying to understand why someone who has everything, talent, popularity, opportunities, would risk all of it by assaulting someone over a lunch table. It doesn't make sense unless... Unless what? Unless you're so miserable that you're self-destructing. Unless some part of you is screaming for a way out but you don't know how to ask for it without losing everything else. The silence between them was electric. Jackson's hands were clenched into fists at his sides, but his eyes had gone shiny. You don't know me, he repeated, but this time his voice cracked slightly. You're right. But I'd like to. Maya took a breath. I'm not your enemy, Jackson. I'm not trying to destroy you. I just want to make it so that what you did to me doesn't happen to someone else. And I think maybe part of you wants that too. He stared at her for a long moment, something complex and painful working across his face. Then he grabbed his backpack and walked away without another word. Maya sat back down, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline. She'd taken a risk with that confrontation, shown her hand maybe too early. But she'd seen something in his eyes in those final seconds, recognition. Understanding. Maybe even relief. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. But she'd planted a seed, and now all she could do was wait to see if it would grow. Want to see how this story unfolds? Subscribe now, because the most powerful transformations happen when someone finally decides that the old rules aren't good enough anymore, ***.